Sharrock. I'm the English hornist with the TUNDI Orchestra. I have a permanent lifetime contract on that. I don't know if Hugh and Jenna know that yet, but anyway, I'm very excited to be here. This talk is actually Hugh and Jenna's fault. They asked me a question that's one of my favorite moments in life. They asked me, do you want to play Tristan and Isolde? It was not even on my bucket list because I knew the Met was never going to call me up and say, hey, you want to come down and play the Tristan solo for us? So, furthermore, if Hugh and Jenna said, we need somebody to talk on a musical topic, tell me right now what it's going to be and you can have the slot, this would be it. I mean, this is one of my favorite things to talk about in all of music. So the issue today that we're going to grapple with, because that's what I grappled with, is where is the musicality in this page of musical score? What is Wagner trying to convey at any given moment, and how do I communicate that? And then how do I make it through this massive page of music with no rests and nowhere to hide? This is literally 3 minutes and 15 seconds of totally a cappella English horn. Now, we'll define that point of musicality in a moment, but just first, a couple disclaimers. I'm not an academiologist, I'm not a theoretician, I'm not a music history guru, though I enjoy all that stuff. While those things would be very interesting and illuminating, I'm not even going to touch on harmony or musical structure or an analysis of the score. This is just my journey with this piece. And I think of Star Trek when Captain Kirk asks the doctor something and Bones says, Jim, I'm only a country doctor, not a miracle worker. All right, I'm just an English horn player that wants to get through this piece and not be embarrassed. Furthermore, the English horn is a rather awkward instrument. If the piccolo would be Tinkerbell, flitting around, disappearing, appearing magically, the English horn would be Eeyore. Okay, you want me to play some long, somber notes? Oh, you got a few fast notes? Well, I don't know, but I'll try. And part of that is the awkwardness of the instrument. Most instruments, you put one key down, you close one tone hole. On the English horn, you push one key down, so you're closing a tone hole, but you're instantly popping open two other tone holes for that note. But then another fingering might say, well, I don't want that tone hole opened. So while you're slowly pushing keys down, there's keys opening and closing. And so it makes for a rather loggy instrument. And if you ever listen to an English horn player and you think, wow, they sound very smooth, well, they practiced, let me tell you. So, all right. Another thing I'm not doing is studying and quoting the great artists on English horn. In fact, there were several statements along the way, moments that came between Hugh and I that kind of impacted my experience with this. And one of them was early on, I said something about recordings, and he said, it's somewhat dangerous to listen to recordings when you're studying a piece. And I remember having, the bipolar, well, sure, it's good to listen to, but maybe it's not, a discussion. But then I decided to take that to heart for this particular thing because I just want to know what Wagner thinks. I don't want to cloud my thinking with other stuff. And furthermore, I had recently perused Gunther Schuller's book. It's about this big, where he spends this amount of pages decrying how conductors had decided to interpret Beethoven based on a personal ideology. And in the process, they ignore so many clues and instructions that Beethoven wrote. In the end, they decided they were more important than Beethoven. They used the score of Beethoven, the order of notes and pitches, but nothing else. They did not communicate at all what Beethoven was intending to do. And so Gunther Schuller's book is this big, his explanation is that much, and the rest of the book is examples of improving that from recordings. So I'm like, okay, I really want to know what Wagner wants. So now today's talk, in case you haven't already figured out, is not a well-planned GPS journey, one point building clearly on another point to another point until we finally arrive at our destination. This is more scatterbrained, a little more like a crime scene where there's pieces of evidence strewn around and you kind of pick them up and touch them and, well, that doesn't make any sense. And until you've touched on everything, it really doesn't make much sense. And the hardest part of this investigation is that you and I, don't realize how distorted our own eyeglasses are while we're looking at things. So though you think you know you see, you have this sinking feeling that what you're looking at really doesn't make sense. So a truly successful conclusion seriously depends on a bit of self-discovery too. So come along for the ride on my own personal journey of grappling with arguably the most massive English horn solo in the repertoire. But first, a little bit of music history trivia that Snopes won't even have any data on. This comes by way of 5 people. The deliverer person is Sigurd Rascher, who happens to be the most important classical saxophonist of the 20th century. Most of the concertos written in the 20th century were written for him. Dahl, Glazunov, all those people. He didn't even have to commission them. They liked him so much they dedicated a piece to him. So his friend was Walter Damrosch, who was kind of like his American father. So Sigurd lived basically from 1900 to 2000. His friend Walter Damrosch, a very famous conductor, lived from the mid-1800s to mid-1900s. His father was Leopold Damrosch, who was a Wagner conductor when Wagner was alive. So he knew Wagner and was a strong acquaintance. So that's where the stories come through. It seems like reliable sources. Finally, though, the contemporary of Wagner and Leopold is Adolphe Sax. Yes, exactly what you think. Adolphe Sax, the inventor of the saxophone. So they are doing Tannhauser in Paris. Calls for 8 pit French horns and a dozen backstage French horns. Adolphe Sax is responsible for recruiting and conducting the backstage. He can't find another dozen French horns that are worth their salt for Tannhauser. So he inserts a couple saxophones. The tonality, the overtone series of the 2 instruments is very similar, and it works beautifully. Well, Wagner catches Mr. Sax and says, wow, that sounded great. Thank you so much. Fast forward, at some point, Wagner finds out that he double-crossed him and put saxophones in. And instead of going, that's an idea, he was mad as anything. Now he's writing Tristan, and he actually writes the English horn solo for alto sax. This is like 20 years after the sax has been invented. And he's like, I'm going to use it. At some point, he remembers that he's mad at Adolphe Sax, and he tears that page out and rewrites it for English horn, which I'm very grateful for. So anyway, so is the apocryphal story. All right, so back to the main point. My goal in this whole thing was musicality. So let's get on the same page there. So the other very famous English horn solo is obviously the New World Symphony. So if you go to page 2, section A, I'm just going to play a little bit of this. And right now I'm going to play it accurately, but not with musicality, shall we say. Just all the right notes and all the right places. Now, you might go, oh, very interesting sound, I like it, and all that stuff, but if you're like me, that didn't move anything in your soul. It was just kind of a listening exercise. Now let's see what the musicality might sound like. Well, that's got a little more meaning in there. That's something you can feel in your heart and not just listen with your head. That had musical intent, which is what the composer really wanted. But the problem is there's limitations here. And by the way, just in case people think this is music, this ain't music. This is paper and ink with scribbles on it to say, if you do this kind of a set of notes and phrases and words and think about it musically, you might connect with what the composer created so that you can transfer it through the air to somebody else's ears, and their soul will be moved the way the composer actually designed it for. So that's the music. The music is the magic. This is just a crude GPS system. All right. Now, furthermore, in thinking about musicality, for me, it helps me to think every note, every moment in a note is either going somewhere, coming from somewhere, or it is somewhere. And that's really easy to see in this final phrase of the English horn area, number B on page 2. Even though he hasn't written a ton of things on there, it's pretty obvious that's the basic shape of the music. All right. So with that context in mind, let's look at your cover page. The actual score from the Breitkopf and Hartel first edition, and the Tristan premiered in 1865, so this is 1860s. All righty. So this is our first piece of evidence, shall we say, as to what Wagner wants. As I glance through this, I see, it's about 40 measures long, 3.5 minutes. Wow, I don't see any rests. There's lots of slurs. Anyway, so what I want us to do at the moment, you're going to have to put your oboe English horn glasses on. Many of you come from other musical backgrounds and would see this music differently, but this is relevant to me. Not only are you an oboist English hornist, but you were raised on concert band music. Elementary band, junior high band, high school band. I only played an orchestra maybe once or twice before I was in college. So what does this band English horn player see when he looks at this score? Well, I see 3 minutes and 15 seconds of a cappella endurance. Wow, endurance. And then I see the beginning of another solo section about 30 bars later. Until they gave me the book, I had no idea that there was more solos. I just knew about the one. It actually comes back 2.5 more times. What else? I see 0 rests. There are no written-in rests. And on top of that, there's a ton of slurs. Now, the good thing about slurs is it's scary to start a sound on a reed instrument, especially a double reed instrument, because you don't know if the reed's going to vibrate. On the other hand, when notes are spaced, you can steal breaths. So all right, what a slur means to a student in a band is do not tongue, do not break the sound. So that leads to a secondary issue. That means a slur means do not breathe. You got to be kidding me. I'm looking at this page and it's not obvious that there's breaths here. That'd be kind of like hiking to a gorge, finding out I got to cross over the gorge, and then seeing one of those 3 rope ladders. You got to be kidding me. Okay. Now finally, on page 2, you don't have to go back there, but you can. When we look at the Dvorak score, the flow and the musicality and the structure is pretty intuitive. You can look at it. You could almost sight read this and do a reasonable job of it the first time. So, but when you look at Tristan here, it is not obvious what that musicality would be. It is not intuitive at all. All right. All right, so now I'm just going to kind of go through this line by line, thinking about it. I got 40 measures here to conquer. All right, so I look at the first line, and there's this nice phrase for about the first 4 bars, and then it goes to the end of the first line. There's a nice long whole note. I can milk that, and I can get all the breath I want in the world. The second line, hey, it starts repeating the same thing I just had. That's excellent. But then I get to the middle of the line, and that's weird. He's got these long notes, and then he ties them to like this extension. It's like, all right, he just wants to make you go a little bit farther. All right, and then there's some ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-dum. And then we get to the third line down where there's finally some whole notes. That's obviously a structural resting spot, but no, it's not. He starts them with a piano, with a crescendo to a fortissimo, and he ties it to the next triplet. You got to be kidding me. All right. Well, we go down to the next line. Oh, okay, there's a dotted half and a quarter note. All right, I can take a breath there. That seems structural, and then it starts into something different. Okay, this is going to be something different. La, 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 la. It's kind of like yodeling. And then it gets to this D flat, tied over long note. That's an obvious breath, but then he ties across it with these eighth to eighth notes, and then when he breaks the slur so that you can tongue on the next note, there's only an eighth note triplet of space. And I can't steal from an eighth note triplet of space to get my breath. And then he gives me a quarter note tied to triplets. Then you're not supposed to breathe in that. And he keeps doing that. And then he finally gets to a cello. Well, you better believe I'm going to be accelerated by this point because I've got to get to some place where I can take a breath. Oh, but then he throws in on the next line a roll. Gee, thanks a lot, with an extension as if to say, ha ha, can you possibly last through all of this? And he gets to this whole note D flat. Thank goodness he's got this whole note D. And he does it again. A crescendo tied to a triplet. And does he mean that that's like a space note, da, ba, 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 bum, but I'm scared what he really means is ba, ta, 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 dum. All right. So then we get down to these 2 half notes that go down to the low F, and he ties that to this kind of escape note, the A flat staccato. What does that mean? And then, okay, now he's got obviously the moment of doom all the way down to the nice low C natural, which if in the middle or even in the beginning would have been wonderful, but by now your face is falling off. And how are you going to arrive here? Anyway, so all right, so that is my journey through this. Now, lest I sound like a clueless neophyte, for purposes of this talk, I decided to listen to some YouTube performances. Now, all the ones I listened to, those 14 I listened to, they're all professionals. There were students on there, and I would have liked to listen to them, but I would have wanted to encourage them instead of critique them, so to speak. I didn't do this research until now. But I just wanted to see how other professionals grappled with the same issues that I was seeing. All right, so turn to page 4. You can see all these marks were the way people decided to deal with the problems or sometimes overlook specific things that Wagner wrote. On the first line there, when you get to measure 5, those staccatos, a lot of people went da 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 da. It almost sounded slurred instead of ta 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 dum. Some people accelerated. There was a fermata at the end, like interminable fermata. The next line sounded very much slurred all the way across. They might have articulated, but there wasn't any space. And so then at the end of the second line, some would accelerate, and then you get down to measure 18, 19, 20, where those 2 whole notes are. Everybody was doing something there, or most people were. They were shortening notes, they were taking a big break after the G and then retonguing, or they were just ignoring that G of the triplet and playing it as if it was a duple and moving on. They would accelerate in this next section, even though we didn't write that. Various legato tonguing. Then we get to that on measure 24, 25, 26, where we finally got a dotted half note there. That would be made quite short so that you could have a lot of breath. But at this point, it's not just a case of getting a breath. If you've done a heavy workout, there comes a point where you're kind of panting, and you don't just need one breath. You need a number of them, and that's where you are as an English horn right now. So you can see as we go along, those slashes are places where people stopped their sound and took a breath. And it happens going down the rest of the page. Some people ignored the raw because it's like, we're dying, I ain't slowing down now. And then we get to measure 39, 40, 41, the ending of doom. Because you barely have any control left, you're not going to space. You're going to just do legato, you might tongue, but you are just going to get through that as best you can all the way to the last note. So it really sounded like Wagner had written a slur. So now this second half of it, you see there's a big star there. There was one person who used circular breathing, because I'm listening, where do they take a breath? And I realized they don't. And then every once in a while you'd hear a slight timbre change. It wasn't very noticeable, but I noticed it because I was studying. And I realized there's circular breathing. All right, sidebar, that is extremely impressive. And yes, I cannot do it, so who am I to say anything about it? But my personal view of circular breathing is, if an audience is with you, they are breathing with you. And if you are circular breathing, they're going to have to disengage from you in order to breathe. The proof of that is, have you ever been in a movie with a scary moment and realized you were holding your breath? That's because the artists created this moment and drew you in. And your natural thing is to hold your breath there, even though there's no sign on there that says, do not breathe. So your audience breathes with you. So I think circular breathing is very impressive, but not what I would choose to do here. All right. So if you flip over to the next page, this is a bit of analysis. I mean, I threw a lot of things out there, but I wanted to show the real typical things that people were doing. So we're on page 5, and that's where there's some circled numbers in here. If you go to measure 11, you'll see 13. And that's the number of people out of 14 that ignored that space and slurred right over it. And then another 7, or still 7 of the 13 obviously, continued on and did not take the next space. And that's because we're early in. I don't need a breath right now. I've got my beautiful sound going. I want to keep it going. So, and they may have articulated, it's a little hard to tell on the recordings, but there definitely was not a space. And yes, that's 13 out of 14, and I won't tell who the 14th one was, but I do want to congratulate Hugh for picking somebody who actually followed what Wagner said right there. So anyway, so if you go down to the next line where the two whole notes are, this is a crisis moment for an English hornist. In here, there were 10 solutions that people chose besides slurring the whole note to the whole note and going all the way without stopping the sound to the triplet. If you go down to the next line, which is like measure 29-ish, 28, 29, in that section there were 8 musicians who X'd out one of those ties, going to a triplet or whatever it was, and took their breath and restarted on the low G. The next line down, there was 11 times that tied note was stopped so you could take a breath and then you kept going. The next line down, measure 34, 35, 36. There's literally 14 times that, and obviously some musicians did it more than once, 14 times that the sound was stopped under the middle of an intentional slur that Wagner wrote. So it's not just me. These are the issues that an English hornist faces. All right. So it's slightly encouraging to me that these problems are endemic to the English horn world, but I didn't research this until now, and it still doesn't help me. And to defend their honor, some of them were playing on stage, from memory, in costume, and at least one of them was walking around. So I spot them, anything they did. They played all the notes correctly, and that's miraculous to me. So absolutely. Now, as I'm practicing, all these problems are showing up. As I'm getting more and more comfortable with the notes, I kind of wanted to have the piece memorized. I didn't want to play it from memory, but I wanted to be that comfortable with it. My goal was to play this at least once a day from mid-January when they invited me to play until mid-August when the performance came. I didn't do that, but that was my goal, and I strove for that. So as I'm getting more comfortable with the notes, I'm still very dissatisfied with the musicality. I'm not feeling it, except for obvious moments. At this point in my experience, it's really a triathlon event of endurance. And keep your melancholy tone, please. And I'm doing all those corrections that I just showed were on the recordings. I'm just trying this correction, I'm trying that correction. I'm actually needing them, and sometimes I'm doing them because I'm out of air, not because I was choosing to do that one. So where's the music? Where do I breathe? So I kind of realize I'm at a dead end. And going to continue this way is not going to get me the big breakthrough I'm looking at. I was sure Wagner did not write something unplayable, and more importantly, unmusical. In an opera so full of passion that critics often panned it because it was just over the top, there's no way he wrote this boring little interlude. So I decided that I had to take it apart somehow. These collections of pitches, intensities, space, duration, each one has its place, and so I need to discover these roles. So I wanted to take it down to its smallest pieces before I try putting it back together again. So about this time, it occurred to me that slurs can mean different things to different musicians. Piano players, string players do not have the issue of tonguing versus slurring. And a slur to a singer can mean different things, such as put this collection of eighth notes with this particular syllable and this collection of eighth notes with that particular syllable. So I started pondering and well, Wagner wasn't bound by the limitations of the English horn. He was a composer. What if he wrote these slurs as phrases? These notes all go together, and those notes all go together, and these two go together, and then those 8 go together. So I decided to start and stop at each slur. get my music glasses here. All right. There's lots of examples I could do, but I'm going to go down to measure 29. That's the one that has the 8 over it, if you're on page 5. So measure 29. That kind of exercise. All of a sudden, moments kind of started to pop. He wants a space, however tiny or large, at the end of every slur. Could just be a comma, could be a semicolon, could be a period, but space. And even individual untied half notes maybe could be spaced. So then I decided that if the slur ends, then there's inherently permission to take a breath in that spot, no matter how counterintuitive it was to me. I knew that breathing was human, so human music has to breathe. All right. And then there was a few more clues that were helpful. One is the backstory. This is a melody that Tristan kind of remembers from tragic, sad events in his life. He's been mortally wounded, his body is in a coma, but not his mind and spirit. His consciousness is in some kind of dream, phantasmagoric world where murkiness and fog that fill and disperse with things coming and going. Anyway, so now that's the point of the disjointed melodic fragments. This is a stream of consciousness event that's almost demented at times. Doesn't have to make sense because you're in a dream world. So that helped inform how to look at the basic musicality of this. Another thing, which was kind of a confirmation that I had tripped upon what I needed, was that the sforzandos, that's the SF, work better with a space before them. If you look on line 1, at the end of the first line, measure 8 and 9, there's a sforzando at the end of measure 9. I'm going to start on the ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-ba, so measure 7. I'm going to do it the typical way I would have done it before I thought this all through. And the point here is for you to listen to how much do you hear the sforzando? Okay, that's the point of this moment right now. And then I will play it correctly, so to speak, modified, and see how much more the sforzando jumps out at you. Now, the way Wagner might have meant it. Sorry about that little chiff there, but all right. The vagaries of English horns. So, and there's another one of those in here, and I realized, wow, those pop. That's what that's what he wanted. It wasn't just a hard tongue, it was that space so that you could get the accent against the silence. So, also in this time when I'm searching for meaning, shall we say, I asked Hugh, I said, if you were going to offer something for interpretation, a suggestion, what would you offer? He said, explore the fifths, of which there are many. So I kind of had two goals with this. First, they're very awkward. You're going across the break almost all the time on these fifth skips. So I wanted it to be smooth, or be able to be smooth as if it was going down a chromatic scale very easily. But I also wanted to understand the relationship between the notes. So starting at like measure 13, that E flat, so I'm like, okay, is things going from the lower note to the higher note? Like this? Or is it from the higher note going down to the lower note, starting on that high flat? I think I tried to kind of blend the two of them eventually, but and really the idea being it's not whether the first note or the second note is the point, it's the space. So it's like the space of this to that space to that space to that space. And that's what I was aiming for. All right. So as I'm putting it back together, I'm looking for places to breathe. So I had some kind of new rule, so to speak. Follow the phrase slurs. Whatever, if there's a slur, follow that. Follow the weird dynamics, because they are not intuitive. But that's because you're not in the physical world. You're in this phantasmagoric world. And then, in the context of all of that, plan and take breaths. All right. So in just a moment, I'm actually going to play this. I had thought about playing Tundi's recording of it. There's times in life when you have musical experiences that you just know for who you were at that day with all the circumstances that it could not have gone better, and you're just thrilled and moved that it went as well as it did. And that is that performance for me. And if you do happen to go back and listen to it, about 3/4 of the way through, on a long note, you'll notice just a little change in timbre. And that's a moment I remember distinctly, because that's when I started feeling like the runner hits the wall, and like I've got a few more lines, and I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna fall on my face. You just dig in and you keep going. And so you can hear that moment in a musician's life if you want to go back and listen to it. Anyway, this is kind of a working performance. If we were really doing this, I would have been practicing for this like it was an Olympic event. For endurance, strength, technique, artistry, I want to nail a 10 when we perform this. However, recently other people, like fierce women warriors who ride flying horses and fearless teenagers who have magic swords, have kind of demanded a lot of my available practice effort. So I'm going to do the best I can. I might even stop and take a couple panting breaths. We'll find out. Anyway, so I invite you to turn back to the cover page now and follow along so you can see how vast is the amount of info that Wagner put in and kind of the inherent difficulties in that. All right. got the right glasses? I do. All right. All right. Everybody take a breath. So where are we? Here's my working picture. Okay, my working picture. Tristan had finally been with the love of his life. Unfortunately, it was also his best friend's wife, who also happened to be the queen. Another friend of the king challenges him to a duel. Tristan is mortally wounded at the end of Act 2. So his friends, between Act 2 and Act 3, take him back to his childhood home. For some reason, he's on a beach, and his friends are sitting there watching to see, is he going to wake up, or is this it and he's going to die? He's lying on the beach in a coma. Out of the silence, the string orchestra plays this somber, questioning, ethereal music. Ba, ba, bee, dee, ba, ba, bee, dee. And they kind of swell up and back down, and there's a little sweet melancholy section, but they do this ethereal, dark, who knows what the future is, 3 times. The third time that they start it, they are starting almost like subterranean, and they go up, and they keep going up, and they get super high, but it's not like you broke the clouds. It's almost like you were kind of taken to another world. You know, it's the dream world where Tristan is right now. And as they get up there, then they slowly float down. And mercifully, Wagner lets the English horn sneak in on the last few pitches of the strings, so I can go and get in case my reed didn't vibrate when I wanted to. Now, this melody that the English horn starts off with is a haunting melody that Tristan remembers. It showed up when there were tragic events in his life, like when his mom died, when his father died, and now when his love is taken away from him and he's dying, it shows up again. Thank you all for being here, and especially thank you to Jew and Henna. Okay, Hugh and Jenna. Yes, I can talk. First, for pursuing an insane dream, just an insane dream to do this. And secondly, for inviting us on the journey with you. It's a dangerous thing to do, but I thought I'd open the floor for questions since there's a couple of minutes. And I'll do my best to fake my way through them if anybody wants to ask something. But yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a number of questions, and you can choose to answer which ones and which one others. Begin with a very simple question: why is it called the English horn? Secondly, was it double breathing that you taught?
Oh, circular breathing?
Circular breathing. Third, do you think are composers, especially Wagner, aware of this problem of when you take breaths? Did he know it and just ignored it, or was he unaware of it? And fourth, explain something about the complex mechanism of the English horn, because you said, I mean, why isn't it like a flute? This is one rather than things opening and closing.
All right. Let me get my other glasses. Okay, do you remember do you remember the questions? That is actually a very debated, there's all kinds of legends from the one that people seem to think is the most legit was that it was actually called the angel horn, because when you see like medieval looking pictures of angels and they have an instrument that's bent, that was a precursor of the English horn. Also, because it was bent, it was called the angled horn. So, and then there's the translation from French to English and all, but there's really no definitive answer to that question. Question two.
Circular breathing.
Circular breathing, okay. It's like a bagpipe. A bagpipe will blow into a bag, and then they're using the bag to actually supply the air while they're breathing normal and then filling the bag. But instead of having a bag, they have their lungs. So they will literally, and I haven't done this before, so an aficionado would probably correct me, but a simplified version of it, they would fill their mouth with air and close off their mouth and use that pressure to keep the sound going while they're breathing in through their nose. And then they have to re-engage their normal exhaling apparatus. So that's circular breathing. 3.
Composers being aware of the problem of breathing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I discovered in different roles in music that I got to participate in was the great composers really understood what was happening for that performer. Like when you, altos, they sing so many concerts where they go G, G, F, G, A flat, G, 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 F, G. But when they do Brahms, it's wonderful to sing a Brahms part, even in a chorus, because it's musical, it's melodic, it goes places. So the great composers totally understood what the individual performers were up against. And sometimes they would say, I don't care what you're up against, I want to do this. But most of the time, they were enraptured with something they were creating, and so they were cooperating with the humanity. So yes, Wagner knew the challenge, and I think that's part of the reason why he was really careful to be incredibly specific, to not leave me the opportunity to reinterpret it the way I naturally would have. And then the mechanism on the English horn, just similar to the oboe. So when I press this key down here, it actually crosses the joint and moves this mechanism. So there's a key opening right here, and there's a tone hole opening underneath this mechanism here. Now, when I put this finger down, I'm actually closing a key farther up. So if I put this finger down, one tone hole is closed. If I put this finger down, one tone hole is closed, but two more popped up for pitch purposes. So now, but if I want to change my notes, when I come down here, one of those extra pitch notes closes. So now I've got, in the span of one note change, I've got 4 different keys going in different directions. Now, the interesting thing is, as your finger's coming down on a tone hole, it doesn't really affect the sound until you seal it all the way down. But when you're releasing a note, the instant there's daylight there, the pitch changes. So now I've got these 2 notes here with one of them saying, or 2 keys, pitch keys, opening and closing at other people's behest, and one person is saying, please open, and the other one saying, no, don't open that one. And so you get this blobby sound in between. See if I can, and that was something I had to practice in college a lot. I would actually intentionally create the blobby sound, because going one direction, you got to anticipate one way, and going the other direction, you have to anticipate the other way. So, okay, B natural to B flat. We'll show that. I'm going to try and move my fingers really slow. It should be da-dum, but I'm getting that little da-ba-dum in there. And then going the other way would be. So it goes da-ba-da, and it's because of those extra 2 notes that are moving from all these levers and fulcrums. A flute and a clarinet, when they push their finger down, they're usually closing one tone hole. Sometimes it's a distance, like it's a lever that's reaching for it. I'm not sure how many times, I don't think there's not much on either of those instruments where they're actually opening or closing multiple tone holes at the same time, except when you get down into the pinkies, which is, extended.
Why do you need 2 or 3 horns?
Oh, all those. It has to do with getting the notes in tune. The basic note would be C and C, okay, which would sound like this. But if you take away those notes that help make the pitch correct, it's all mechanical pitch correction. So people can get paid big bucks to solve that and charge double reed players for it.
The complexity of that instrument, having to close some holes, open others, must have to do with that unique sound, right?
Yes, I think the complexity does. I mean, that's part of the reason why an English horn would be a little more like Eeyore than Tinkerbell, because, but then that becomes the sound that it has, so then that's the sound that the composers take advantage of. Plus, there's a lot of wood here, and how this came to be, I do not know. It's the subject of many cartoon moments, but it's intrinsic to the darkness of the sound. My oboe teacher used to call the English horn the anguish horn, because when the soprano died in the opera, the English horn came in with a sorrowful tune. So, anyway, yes?
I sort of noticed, especially on the short notes, that at the end of the phrase, it's like you made the short note half its value. Like if an eighth note became a 16th
Like a 16th?
16th note for the time for the breath.
Huh.
I mean, maybe it wasn't so calculated exactly like that, but, and I loved your interpretation. If that is what Wagner was thinking of, why didn't he write it out that way so that everybody would play it that way?
Well, I have 2 family members and a really dear friend who are composers. They all happen to be here. And the challenge for a composer is they really want people to play or sing what they're thinking. So they really want to put information down, And if you go back in the history of composers versus, shall we say, performances, the longer music went on, the more specific they got and the more pedantic they got about trying to put in information. But there comes a point where if there's too much information, you look at it and you kind of fog over as a performer. That's interesting about me changing the eighths into sixteenths. I'll have to think about that. I was using that as my technique right now of putting in the space and not being too late to the next event, but that's a really cool observation. Thank you. But if that's what he had intended and he had written a 16th note with a 16th rest, then all those places, all of a sudden, there's a lot more ink. And just even seeing all the ink for a performance, like, whoa, what's this detail? You know. But see, even more commas, like those last couple lines have been a comma every beat. If that's so, I'd have to ask Wagner, but that is a good, very good point and quite an interesting observation. Thank you. So.
What's going on with your notes on page 3?
Did I miss that? I'm sorry. That was just my experience kind of working through it and where I got progressively more and more frustrated until, and then of course I managed to get across the finish line, but they had to rush oxygen to me at that point. So that's all that was. Anyway, so my goal was to not have that experience on a concert. So anyway, well, thank you all so much for putting up with me and listening to this. This is one of my favorite things in the world, is to play and then to get to interact with one of my favorite pieces of all time is just such a joy. So thank you all.